Well, yeah, but St. Thomas is built one right almost to the paper.
Yeah, Reese. My wife is Laurel. She's planner. She's 6'8", but then I've got. Yeah, so I know what it was called. Yeah.
And I believe in that.
Yeah, they really.
I mean, I'll get
Somebody. And thankfully, like. They actually get really serious about comedians, which is great.
Roy, I don't, I see some things are on. He was like, it's like this. I still know he's wasting away.
That's obvious.
Everybody got it. Yeah, it's like everybody's so eager.
Welcome everybody to our housing and zoning conversation. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. As people keep rolling in, grabbing snacks, coffee. We're a little behind with the snow and everything and the normal routine, but we're going to jump right in because we have a lot to cover. So as we get started, I just wanted to highlight the purpose of this meeting. If anyone wasn't clear, we're here to understand the struggles we in our community have related to housing, learn about the root causes and propose solutions we can implement together. So that is a big conversation. So we have a lot to get through. So just to get started, we're going to do a quick turn and talk. We're going to do 1 minute instead of 2 minutes. Should I introduce myself? Yeah, so I'm Joel Beard, member here since 2017, renter. I didn't prepare my introduction, so as I announced last week, I got involved with Faith in Minnesota, which is connected to Isaiah, door knocking in the election for Carrie Rayrauer, and she's on the housing committee. And so I've stayed involved after the election because the election's over. Now what? What do we do to keep moving this vision forward for the kind of world we want to create? And so I've been trying to stay involved with Isaiah and working on their housing initiative in the Hennepin County area, or the Hennepin County Isaiah team is focused on this housing and zoning reform initiative in the coming legislative session. So go ahead and take 1 minute to turn to your neighbor, introduce yourself, and share what is your vision for housing in your community.
It's the same. And I mean, where they have space that is there.
Yeah, I would say this is not maybe subject really well. Details of like, I'd say it's reflected on, yeah, a place to stay, a place that is affordable, a place that is serving towards events.
We work a lot.
And also a place where people feel like they live in an area that's safe where their property rights will also be respected.
All right, I'm sure you have a lot more to share, but we're going to come back together. If you didn't notice, there's a sign-in sheet at the tables. If you could please make sure to sign in as we're having this conversation. And are there two people who want to share out some of the things that were discussed during this turn and talk?
You gotta use that thing?
I don't know.
So I live in Golden Valley, and as I walk my neighborhood, I notice people are building additional dwelling units, which is something when we moved in 30+ years ago would have never been allowed. So it's a step in the right direction, and you know, so.
Anyone else?
I live in South Minneapolis and I've been there for, oh my God, I don't want to say out loud, 30 years. How about that? And I guess when I look at these questions, it's really the first one. I'm worried that I won't be able to move from where I am to where I might need to be. And I think that I don't know how to explain this, but the people that are really struggling and can't really reside on their own, if there could be some kind of multiple occupancy housing that has kind of like what a lot of seniors have right now is all these things that they can do during the week with the multiple housing for needy would have to have some medical stops that they can make on their way out. I guess that's one of my biggest concerns is the homeless that are perpetual.
Thank you. I'm sure many others have other things they would like to share, and there will be more time later. Speaking of time, this is our agenda. So we got through the welcome and introduction. We are a little behind. We're going to spend about 10 minutes defining the current housing problems and their impacts. And I'll pass the mic to David to talk about the root causes and zoning, and then finish off with Harmon talking about next steps. And just a reminder, this is in partnership with Isaiah, and there's many conversations like this happening around the state, around Hennepin County, hoping to inspire collective action, yes. And there are handouts that say more about that. Okay, so defining our current housing problem and their impacts. Just want to open up the floor to discussion of what are some ways current housing system is not working for people. And we'll spend maybe 5 minutes just sharing out, and then I have some to go over in case we miss any. So maybe discuss at your table for like 2 minutes, and then we'll share out after that.
What's not working? All sides.
I used to think that and we all have one very short. So somehow the systems are
I think people like what I'm marketing these things. My generation playing off stupid money. That's that's also right. Yeah. Again, but across all levels.
Did you learn what the solution was to
He just had to turn on, so.
Got the solution, turn on the power and wall.
No, it was already on. I had to turn on
You must have done that like almost simultaneously. Rico walking over there. He pushed the button, red light came on, boom, it worked.
Oh, interesting.
You must have been there at like.
Yeah.
The right moment.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So it could have been
A
one or the
two-part
other.
thing.
Yeah, probably.
There's some switch.
So it's around the corner, there's that big black thing on the wall that has like that has like, it's like the main part of like all the sound of the whole building. And then the master wasn't on yet, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, it'd be so important to just have all of these small.
All right, I hear a lot of good discussion continuing. If we could have each table, just one person, if someone would like for each tables to share out some of the things that were discussed at your group. So we can all hear. So is there someone who'd like to start?
Good morning, buenos dias, toda gente. As you all know, I'm Rico, and Sharon had a lot of really good things to say about the largest growing population of homelessness is seniors. And in the state, there's a lot of rural homelessness. And what Sharon shared earlier and what she shared with the table is that growing concerns of mental health, mental issues regarding the risk of homelessness among any people or population. We also discussed, I discussed with the group, the table, about property maintenance, housing maintenance, storage facilities, land use. I live here and I'm here literally 24/7, and I see people camping out or tents or starting fires here on our property. So it's, there's perpetual for nonprofits and for-profit developers as well. We're all facing it.
I live in Ward 11, and in Ward 11, like 97% of the housing is housing and not rental, so it's owner. But we're also an aging population, and I was just at a meeting yesterday where a lot of older people who live in our neighborhood want to stay. They want to move into condos or apartments that aren't yet built and can't because of zoning, but that's what they actually want.
You mentioned the wide-ranging lack of housing of all types, especially rental housing of all sizes, and we were really noting the lack of housing for all income levels. What else did we say? That's about it. Oh, yes, housing that's especially for low-income folks, that is near services, childcare, grocery stores, the whole like livable community concept is lacking in so many areas.
All right, there is a handout. You may have already been reading through current housing problems in Minnesota and proposed solutions. So along with what people mentioned, there are not enough homes, costs, displacement from rent increases, huge racial disparities, racial home ownership gap. And then as Deb was just talking about transportation, if people don't live near where they work, then they're driving a lot more. So, oh yeah. Oh gosh, we had this whole other section. I was trying to wrap up by 9:30, but we got to spend a couple minutes just instead of just thinking about the problems writ large. How have you been impacted, or people you know? So let's take, I don't know, 3 minutes. So again, discuss with your table for a minute, and then we'll have a couple people share out So how have you or someone you know been impacted by these problems with housing?
Insurance. Last year. Insurance was about 30 something. And there are older people that have play part of not. Like a lot of older people are right on. Yes, we had another huge increase in this. These are another. They're all going to happen. So. In general, it's still for 1980, doesn't have sprinklers installed. Codes, but Minnesota was the highest expense. Right, and everything that's happening in California, Florida, all that is related, and it's all going to impact everybody in this day.
I forgot about that, but it's true. I mean, man, it comes from a couple of years ago. Last 2 summers, there was kind of dancing, but I laid under your nail down somewhere and put a new good file.
I think the loss in Los Angeles right now, already in New York, we have 150 billion so far.
It's not even.
In Southern California. And Florida, right, start moving.
Where are they?
That's those costs. Providing.
All right, we'll come back together. I don't mean to cut off these conversations, and please keep having these conversations, of course, beyond the forum. These are important conversations to have. Briefly about me, I was thinking about this question for myself, and while I haven't really struggled with my own housing much, I teach high school, and my students, when their families go through eviction or struggle with stable housing, that I see that impact in my classroom. And so that's one way that I really see how it impacts me. Would a couple people like to share for the whole group? I don't want to cut too much into David and Harmon's time, but do you want to hear?
We talked about an emergence of a crisis in insurance industry with global warming. Our condo, I'm the president of the board till Tuesday. Thank you, Jesus. But last year, our insurance trebled from like 30,000 to like 90-some thousand. And there are ours is not a real fancy upscale condo. It's mostly older people who have a hard limit for what they can afford. And it's going to be a crisis for everybody pretty soon.
Yeah.
The thing I was sharing is what we notice in our neighborhood, because we live across the street from affordable housing. And one unit is for women who've been homeless, and there are 60 women there, and they have 24/7 services. And that seems to be working beautifully. The other building is supportive housing for families and single people, and there are no services provided. And the police are there often because of fighting and whatever. And so if you're going to have supportive housing, people that are newly housed, they need services. You can't just provide a place.
All right. Thank you. And again, keep having those conversations. I think I'm just passing this off to David. Yeah. Yeah, so thanks for sharing. Clearly, our system is not working for many of us in our communities, but why and what can we do about it?
Hi, everybody. I'm David Shea, a member here for a long time and member of the NZA team here for a long time. And I'm somebody who, in my young adult years, was thrilled to have the opportunity to move into a limited equity housing co-op. Yeah, it was a whole experience to get that limited equity housing.
Soundtrack.
Yeah. Venture in South Minneapolis, and so relieved to move to a place that had we ran the building and could manage the costs ourselves, and we weren't subject to the profit motive of an investor managed kind of rental property. Anyway, a lot of our issues we realized that we've been talking about around the shortage of housing, expensive housing, the low walkability of housing, even the skyrocketing insurance costs due to climate change impacts. I think a lot of it can be traced back to zoning, which are the rules we make in through our governments about what can be built where. And really, it's a history of about 100 years of putting in regulations that require housing to be more expensive, farther apart, and partly intended to make it impossible for people of color to move into white neighborhoods. So it's really been a history of racial exclusion as well. Good news, of course, punchline again. People created zoning, and so we people can change zoning if we want to. So back to here, yeah. So as I said, zoning is simply how right now cities mostly decide what can be built where. Where can housing be built? Where can industrial and commercial properties be? What density is allowed? What mixture? In the 19th century, it was common to have mixed use neighborhoods. People walked to workplaces, people walked to the corner store or the corner saloon. So they were extremely walkable neighborhoods. In the 20th century, let's go forward next slide. Let me, I guess, pause for a moment to say, also during that, 19th century era of mixed use neighborhoods, there's also an era where there was a huge push by many, many white people to make sure Black people were kept in their place, which was not in a white neighborhood. And the rise of the Klan and other white supremacist groups that intimidated people, the emergence of what became called sundown towns, where if you were Black or brown, you better be gone by the time the sun went down. And while this slide suggests that maybe that was in the 1870s and 1890s, actually that legacy lived on into well into the 20th century. I can tell you in Golden Valley, where I've now lived for the last 10 years, in 1970, the city lost a lawsuit by a Black musician who was driving into Golden Valley from Dinkytown, actually, where he lived at the time, to play in a jazz club that existed in Golden Valley at the time. He got pulled over by the cops 9 times in 6 weeks and hassled, and he filed a suit against the city of Golden Valley's police chief and 3 police officers, and he won the suit. And the city had to pay thousands of dollars to the man. And so, it was like the police in my suburb were actively taking steps to make sure Blacks didn't come in. That's so the kind of informal growth of cities in the 1800s, in the 1900s began to formalize through zoning. Actually, the first zoning codes began in the 1914 to 16 era, and a lot of it was, explicitly keeping Blacks out of neighborhoods where whites didn't want them. Next slide. This is a slide. All right.
Well, I'll just say, we'll jump around a little bit, but in addition to those racially restrictive zoning laws, there were also racially restrictive covenants put on property deeds. And again, Golden Valley and many suburbs and some parts of Minneapolis as well had these racial restriction covenants in their property deeds into the 1950s or 60s. It wasn't illegal, I don't think, until the 1968 Fair Housing Law. And so you can see some example of text of what would commonly appear in a deed. There's actually been a project underway in the last decade or so here. It originated also in Golden Valley, called the Just Deeds Project, which helps people to identify whether they have a racial restriction covenant in their property deed, and if so, to expunge it.
David, can I counter that just a little?
Yeah.
Because there's also two attorneys work for the city of Minneapolis to help citizens with this process that David was talking about. I'm all for this, but it's a very performative act. Because that is no longer, like, you cannot discriminate in that way anymore. Can you imagine what two attorneys for the city of Minneapolis could do to help people get housing and fight all their landlords now? That is what I would prefer, not white people who are trying to perform.
Yeah, it's a symbolic act of solidarity more than it's a structural change.
And if you can do it without any cost, do it, great, but if we're spending two salaries on that, I'm not. Buy or sell the house instead.
Yeah.
Cleaning up as part of the world. Yeah, correct.
So actually in 1917, the explicit racial zoning, like we saw from that Baltimore slide, was struck down by the Supreme Court of the day. Not that they were against Jim Crow, but they felt that it was discriminatory towards property owners to limit who they could sell their properties to if they wanted to. Well, when it became then illegal to write racial restrictions into the zoning codes, the emerging profession of city planning that was starting to write zoning codes in the 19-teens pivoted to write codes in a way that would work on principles of economic exclusion. So if we make neighborhoods more expensive to live in and to build in, that'll keep the poorer riffraff out. And of course, our whole economic system was set up to make sure that Black and brown people were poorer. And so it worked beautifully as a racial exclusion strategy in addition to a class exclusion strategy. This guy, Harlan Bartholomew, was kind of the father of American city planning. He was a giant in the field. He was the first full-time city planner in the country, hired first by Newark, New Jersey, and then worked for 34 years as the lead planner for the city of St. Louis. He also served on 3 different federal planning advisory commissions under Herbert Hoover, FDR, and Eisenhower. And he was motivated to protect white neighborhoods against being invaded by Negroes. St. Louis in the 19-teens and 1920s was one of the places where the Great Migration of Blacks fleeing the, brutally Jim Crow South were coming north to take industrial jobs and so forth. And white people of St. Louis that were already there were very nervous about having Black people move in close to them. So he was a pioneer in this strategy of writing the rules under economic terms to keep poor people and therefore Black people out. This is when the single-use zoning principle became central as well, where if you've got commercial or industrial uses that cannot be in a residential neighborhood and vice versa. It was really a car-centric paradigm for planning. He was the person who would help St. Louis rebuild its street network to accommodate cars, wider streets and so on. This is when parking rules began getting him too. So, that was the idea. We'll just have, we'll make it possible so we only live with people just like ourselves, or maybe just like ourselves or a little richer than ourselves. And we'll keep the colored folks out. And this, of course, is reinforced not only zoning, but by, you know, what banks and lenders and real estate industry did. You know, the phrase redlining is came to being because literally starting in the 1930s, city planners would draw a red line around areas that were considered higher insurance risks. And it was almost 100% correlated with where poor people, where people of color, and where Jews in the 1930s lived. Those of you who know much about the history of Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, know that before North Minneapolis is known as a black neighborhood, it was the Jewish, primarily Jewish neighborhood. And this is, the banks did this with, conforming to expectations of the Federal Housing Association, which provides mortgage insurance. The government mortgage agencies would not give mortgages to non-whites like they would to whites. So, these are the problems we've had for 100 years. Next slide. And of course, if you look at these maps here, 1930s on the left, current zoning on the right, and the racial patterns of settlement. Once those patterns get started, they endure a long time. So that's where we are today, you know, and in Minneapolis over the last, what is it, 5, 6, 7 years, it's gone through a pretty big struggle to adopt what its 2040 plan, which undoes a lot of this racially and economically restrictive zoning for housing, opening up the possibility of having more kinds of housing in more places. Taking away these zoning code things of large minimum lot sizes, parking requirements, 2 and 3 car garages, prohibiting higher density, lower cost types of housing like duplexes and townhomes. And the aesthetic mandates, you know, thou shalt have a brick facade on the front of your house that drive up the cost for builders. And so here we are with not enough housing, cost very expensive and rising more rapidly than inflation. And because we're dispersed through our housing codes, our zoning codes, we got to drive everywhere. We have too many cars, warming. Dave's insurance is going up from 30 grand a year to 90 grand a year because of all the weather incidents and so. Anything else? Yeah. Plus, the fact that zoning is managed on a city by city level means that anybody who wants to build housing, you know, has to go through an arduous permitting and approval process in whatever large or tiny municipality they're in. And one example that we're familiar with in Isaiah, Mills Church in Minnetonka wanted to partner with Habitat for Humanity to build townhomes on its part of its parking lot and its property. And they had to battle for 4 years to win approval from their city, and they had to reduce the scale of it from 14 to 10 housing units. And so long as we have this kind of not my backyard sentiment reinforced by local zoning decisions and permitting, we're never going to build enough housing to match up with our population. Our vision is simple. You know, it ought to be easier to build homes of all types and all price points in many different places. So, next one. So we're working through Isaiah this year, particularly to persuade our state legislators to do more zoning reform that would make it possible in more places. And just like now we have state level building codes that regulate minimums for safety and quality in housing, we'd like to have that principle applied also to these questions that impact supply, affordability, density, climate friendliness. So. Allow more kinds of housing in more places, eliminate the exclusionary economic rules that drive the price up. Allow homes and businesses to be in the same area. And build home, school, and work close together. So, this is what we're working to pass. Mike.
Can I ask a question about the politics of this?
Yeah.
That's too soon.
Yeah.
So it would seem to me that much of what's up here would appeal.
We got our line.
It seems that much of what is up here could appeal to the libertarian wing of the Republican Party. Maybe not other parts of it, but does that mean there's potential for getting some legislators or senators in the legislature to co-sponsor this?
Yes, it's refreshingly bipartisan. You know, the builders, the realtors, and the developers, both nonprofit and for-profit, are in favor of this, and are quite a number of Republican legislators. The opposition is also bipartisan, so it's complicated that way.
So in warmer weather, I volunteer out at Cohasset Park. And if you go around Cochrane and Rogers and that area, they're building large amounts of both big houses and I would assume townhomes. But, you know, we're losing a lot of property and it's just very interesting. And, you know, their signs are, you know, buy a townhome starting at $500,000. Not affordable.
Gotta go to Ralph.
I had the remarkable privilege of living in the Houston area for 3 years, Houston, Texas. There is no zoning in Houston, no zoning. So you can use your imagination as to what that might look like. I'm in favor of loosening up the zoning laws, but the reaction some people have is to build gated communities. And so how that change in zoning laws are crafted needs to avoid gated communities as an outcome.
Yeah.
Your comment, Ralph, makes me think of one of the mottos in Isaiah, which is in Isaiah, we're about the work of transforming our world and transforming ourselves. Because don't kid ourselves. Zoning reform alone is not going to drive away the impulse to stay away from people different from us, stay away from people poorer than us, stay away from people targeted us if we're white people. So yeah, in communities, it's, you know, a struggle that won't end. It's only
So one of the other challenges is the differing data cycle times. The time for a house to be constructed is different than the time for a transportation access system, which is different than the data cycle time for zoning planning requirement changes, which is different than the data cycle time for capital access. And so part of the game here, as Isaiah goes forward, I think, is to advocate for transparent data in all of these sectors and to recognize the interconnectivity of the various data cycles.
Thank you, Paul. I'm gonna ask Megan, I'll run it over to Harmon, who's gonna bring us home here.
Okay. I wanted to ask your opinion. January 26th, we are inviting Jim Bartman down the street from Mount Olive to talk about the constitutional amendment for housing, which is Our Future Starts at Home. The current program right now, it's called Bring It Home, Minnesota. It's giving like rental voucher and partial funding. Now, this constitutional amendment of Our Future Starts at Home will be bringing full funding, not only for housing, mental services, and it's all in one packet. So I wanted to ask you if you've heard about this amendment. Is this something that we could tag along as at a level, advocacy level of constitutional level? While Isaiah is doing the works, grassroots and at all levels. So wanted to ask that. And second question is that, does Isaiah know or aware of all these different buildings that are not being used in Minneapolis? How do we counteract with that for those buildings to be available for affordable housing?
Two great questions. Come back on January 26th to talk about at least the first one, right?
Right.
Hi, I'm Harmon Abrahamson. And Dave laid out a good case for why we're talking about zoning. So another question is, what can we do to help change these laws? And there have been some proposals advanced, as you can see here. The difficulty is that these laws are made and changed at the local level, city ordinances. However, the state does have some control over that by crafting laws that would disallow or encourage certain aspects of zoning. So, for example, eliminate those exclusionary economic rules or allow duplexes, townhomes, ADUs in any area that's currently zoned residential. The legislature is considering some bills that would do these sorts of things and set a statewide standard for zoning rules. This has been done already. That we're not breaking ground here because this has been done already in states like Oregon, Montana, California. And as Dave pointed out, this idea has both bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition. And so it's not split down party lines, but more nuanced economic and cultural issues. One of the important trends to note is that the outer ring suburbs of the Twin Cities seems to be where this idea is most contested. And some of the loudest opposition voices are individual cities or leaders or organizations like the Minnesota League of Cities. So one of our key strategies is to get these bills passed is to show that people across the state, but especially in the suburbs where some of us live, want our homes to be affordable, less segregated, and more racially equitable. So we want to build support in the suburbs among everyday people, organizations, and elected leaders. So this is how we're going to launch this with the 2025 legislature. We want to continue the discussion like we're doing here. We want to have local research visits with city councils and mayors, especially in the suburbs, and relate with our state legislators. Many key committee chairs are located in Hennepin County. So the first aspect of that will be a meeting this Thursday at House of Hope Lutheran Church in New Hope. And that's our regular third Thursday meeting of the Hennepin County Isaiah base. And that's where we're going to plan a series of events for the spring to show legislators that there's local support for these ideas around the metro. So I'm going to have Joel pass out some commitment forms here. Wouldn't be an Isaiah event without commitment forms, right? Okay. So if you fill out your personal information at the top, there are opportunities for you to continue to participate both in the discussion as well as take action. And so the first of these is that Thursday, January 16th meeting. The second thing on the commitment form is an invitation for you to personally invite other people who aren't here today, but who you think might be interested in doing this work. The third thing is some of these issues are revenue neutral. Changing the zoning laws isn't going to take a lot of money at the legislative level. But some of the responses to the housing problem, like the constitutional amendment that Esther pointed out, do have quite a financial lift. And so resources, funding is an important issue. The third thing on our commitment form is there's going to be a Fund Our Future rally where Isaiah and a number of other allies are going to make the case to the legislature that we need continued support, and we need beefed up support. We need the rich to pay their share, rich corporations to pay their share. And then there are check boxes for if you're interested in joining a research visit in your community, or if you have a connection to another organization that might support our efforts, we can pass that information along to the Isaiah organizers to make further contacts. And if you're interested to the link to the slides about the housing that David used, we can make that link available if you give us your email address at the top and check that box at the bottom. So I'll give you a few minutes to fill these out, and please give them to one of us as you complete. And thank you for attending our forum. David, do you have something else?
Take a picture after you filled out your form so you can remember what you're committing yourself to.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for coming.